Sometimes when you make a decision in your life, you question how much is exactly too much. This is considering when something takes off on a level you haven't seen before and you want to capitalize on its popularity, where you really want to make the most out of it, but also conflicted enough to even do so where it may or may not work to its thought's advantage. Like, I know this is a good idea now, but would people actually hate me doing this constantly? What if this seems good to get some viewership, but actually fails to impress in the end? Why shouldn't I wait until this comes out? But what if it's too long enough for people to even care? These are events that just build and build from thinking of a good scenario that's always overshadowed by the worst, planning for a future that may never be, but more plausible to reality than what might seem. And that is exactly what anxiety does to a person, and the importance of what the feeling brought to Inside Out 2 that took the world by storm. And although it was clearly a main emotion featured in the trailers, I really didn't think such a character would end up being the best element of the entire film for something so real and relatable to the human heart. One that, when you actually think about it, is the true antagonist of Inside Out 2, something that the original never really had unless you talk about Joy's own actions in the first. She is a villain without actually being one at all, if you get what I mean, that is doing things that are bad, but also supposedly good in her mind's eye, as anyone would think when you go about the actions of Riley that we all relate to, but grounded in the best ideals of Inside Out. And when you think about all these reasons, you really do find it best just to title this video, The Problem with Anxiety. Not that she's a bad character obviously in what you think by that definition, by the movie's praises, but by the truth of that emotion that brings you doing too much to even stop. It's also better to explain or describe it as that because you still can't really say she is a villain in that sense. Yes, my most recent video before this was slamming this character in as a stupid reference point for being a good antagonist rather than a poor villain, but how I just find it hard to really title something like her as that, as this type of villain when she's actually not. Of course, this video will dive into this obvious antagonistic traits against the main emotions that we all know that is somewhat villainous in that perspective, yet still not enough to still really call her one, as she is an important new piece in Riley's mind and truly loves and admires the original emotions no matter what, finally learning to work together to grow Riley into the person she is meant to be. And of course, because the full video isn't out, I will be reusing clips in order to justify my points. But before we dive into the character, let's recap what real anxiety is meant to be like. What most of us know about it is this feeling of dread to certain events in life, a fear of something happening, focusing on what happens to our future in the bad, and trying to learn to prevent that or see something better than what others could think. At least that is the short applicable definition of the very character, where that was the thought way before the movie was released of the problem of having such emotions, where the basic 5 we've already covered already did it better. Like, there is also the point that anxiety is basically fear in a different way. It's not adding anything new except new characters that might be redundant. Like, what does she actually add when fear covers the basic principle of preparing for these shocking scenarios? Well, the answer is relatively simple in the ever-changing progress of life, where people do become more complex and they need what anxiety would call to be more sophisticated emotions in their life as they grow and build into a different person. This is where you truly understand and accept why her role was made to be this specific way, not just for the character herself, but the entire effect on its world through sights and sounds and colors of every type. It is more of a necessary focus that grounds itself towards real life paths rather than fear itself being scared of any in the moment temporary action, the possibility that makes what we think should be rather than what we are right now. It's a feeling that does get worse and consumes the best of you despite the good intentions that really play as a perfect parallel to Joy in our own life. We remember how important she was as a character as that main event in the film, even if her expectations about life are delusional or unrealistic, but still how she is an effective leader who learns to grow and accept others. That initially you think about pushing away the other feelings until you realize how important they really need each other and grow into a plethora of different subsets that are truly important. So when you realize that angle, you truly understand the great importance that anxiety has on this plot compared to the last. Joy was that hero who went on this journey with sadness after trying to fix her own mistakes that thought hurt Riley in the past, but now able to understand that path, trying to help work with these emotions, but got purposely shoved out when that was deemed not fit. You see, introducing her character as a bright, hyperactive being is absolutely brilliant for reasons that signify someone with good intentions, but a crazy way to do them. It is an excellent reflection inside and out, yes pun intended, of how Riley's interactions with the new girl she looked up to are the same way with how anxiety looked up to Joy, moving towards the next stage in life when her old life decides to leave her. You think of the puberty button that comes into play into the console, and you see it expanding greater than it was before, that showcases this ever-increasing importance importance of having these new characters appear on the screen, the new changes that are crucial into someone's development. So the big point of anxiety is her planning for the future. She thinks logically about things with her console, showing all the different scenarios that can happen, about trying to make her better than what she was now, which requires her to change her sense of self, to let go of the old and in with the new of being I'm a good person into something better, which means removing what was established in those original core emotions. She acts more like a control freak, wanting to have a pulse on every single subject and moment in her life, which means nobody should be able to stand in her way. If one dares, it must be removed, but not out of bitterness or spite like a regular villain would, but for a well-intentioned reason where she still does even apologize for getting rid of joy, anger, disgust, sadness, and fear out of the picture to bottle them up, to become suppressed emotions because that's not what Riley needs anymore in her life, needing something more sophisticated in life according to these unrealistic, overblown scenarios. Like, that is the true definition of her character in terms of overblowing everything, the necessity of bringing the unnecessary in her life. It is crucial that they made this sense of self a centerpiece of the film, both in its color of blue and orange, to signify those opposing viewpoints that are still overall wrong for that health of oneself. That they add things that validate a lie, that encourage a person to work themselves to death to something that isn't true, like Riley pushing and pushing harder to become the best hockey player just to impress her coach and new friends who she looked up to. It just creates a scene that makes total sense when you feel like you're not enough, forcing something else inside to take control. And a lot of those thoughts really ring true for everyone, including myself, who bounce back and forth between making this video or not, to realize that I might be pushing myself because I want to succeed on here, but also worried that nothing might come out of it. I just see something and worry about how others around me on here or anywhere else in the world might actually feel, and I really push myself too hard to believe my future would be better off if I continue doing this specific thing, and I don't know if it's even going to work at all regardless. And the harder you go, the more difficult it becomes to realize what exactly you are doing. You are just making your life worse rather than better, and each time you see her add a core memory down her to make her vision of the sense of self grow, it just truly becomes more unstable. The second you have a thought, you make up like 10 scenarios that may or may not happen. Like, the perfect moment to describe this is how she turned the entire Pillow Fort arena into a 1984 animator sweatshop, looking upon everyone like Big Brother to keep constantly feeding an imaginary beast of negativity and stress for a day that may never come. The importance is on the moment that happens right then and now, where however you think of a good thought, anxiety always knows how to manage to turn that into a negative, and how the world even on the outside shows how to demonstrate her influence by making the color orange appear everywhere just like herself, sprouting into this world of craziness that never remains to be stable. And stability never happens when you decide to rapidly change things. You add these new memories each time they're created that satisfies her definition to the pool that tries to change the entire belief system of Riley. When I originally saw these scenes, I really got disgusted because it felt like she wasn't understanding anything that Riley was. Remember, she only came into existence after Riley just turned 13 years old, so things are a little bit different compared to the time Joy and the other emotions spent with her, the core memories that are still there and each one that was tossed out. We're just constantly reminded in the sea of forgotten things located in the back of our heads do actually make us who we are today. Every mistake that we actually make is a part of ourselves as much as each success we take. Sure, she can analyze situations that are well-intentioned that can prevent disasters, but she herself cannot control every situation that life throws at you, and only makes what fears the most come true more than she realizes it to block it out. That the more she does it, the more she herself gets her own anxiety worse off, creating dangerous storms to stop anyone but herself trying to effect control, to the point where she can't either, where Riley starts to harm herself and everyone around her, because she now thinks that she is not good enough. The conflict of self stating that I'm a good person, but then the newer emotions working so hard trying to be better only for that to fall apart because she was never deemed ready or good enough to accomplish anything because they pushed her to this certain point. This part is the most powerful scene in the film, where she does have a panic attack that is so very real and relatable, knowing what it looks like on the inside when somebody loses that control, in both senses of the real character and the emotion, becoming too much to even bear. This is the true source of where the problem of anxiety really relied in all senses of that word, until you actually see her shed a tear, crying and feeling sorry because she thought she was protecting her, but realizing she could never be in control of who she is meant to be, in the sense of self that actually changed constantly into many forms, because no person is really perfect. They aren't fully good enough or fully bad and should never put themselves down to the point where they say they aren't enough because they are in their own way. And characters like Joy still understand this greatly too, even when she stopped others. She realized that not changing them to a certain point actually works because that's not who they are. And when you learn from the growth of Joy, you realize that she deserves all of them for who she is. Not one should ever decide or define the journey, as the journey is more important than the destination. Sure, again, she might overthink things to the extreme, but she still isn't a bad force that can be full-on villain, where the problems she presents can easily work themselves out with simple solutions of letting her live around the world to shape whatever can happen. To me, anxiety is just such an important force in our life that can make things marginally better or overall worse that is just good to live with. It was the best move that they could ever make in the movie, where she becomes the overall antagonist that perfectly represents these types of traits while still not actually being the typical villain at the same time, and one that genuinely loves each other and what they can do. Something I've learned very much well applied to this entire thought process, thinking if anything I did was right to do in this video, or even think about, because I know it's been overdone. And I think this channel has already proven I'm out of those ideas. But also accepting that it's completely okay and that I can truly live with that and praise such a movie that is important on that level. So with that said, do not let your worst fears and anxieties control you, and you can be the best you were meant for. And I'm all done. Goodbye.